We're going to wrestle with this question: can machines be moral agents? Here is my plan of attack. I want to start off by explaining why people are even beginning to think about that now. I mean, they've been thinking about it for a long time, but recently there's been a real surge of interest in developing machines that have moral competence. And I want to explain why that is and what's driving that interest. And then I want to spend just a few moments explaining my own personal motivation and how I came into this area. And then briefly touch on moral development in humans, which is a huge subject, but I think I've got one slide on it. And then look at how that might be applied to moral developments in robots. So why are people interested in developing machines with moral competence? And I want to argue that there are three drivers that are pushing us in that direction. First one is the concept of autonomy. And autonomy, when we talk about robot autonomy, it's not quite the same as human autonomy, so it has a slightly different meaning. Essentially, it means a machine being able to do things, make decisions on its own within its environment without direct human intervention all the time. As autonomy increases, as machines are making more and more of their own decisions, it seems to me more and more likely that they'll be making decisions that have moral consequences on the people and the environment around them. The second driver is social embedding. What we're finding in the last 5 years is a huge surge of interest in getting machines to interact with people. For decades, robots have been working in factories in cages in isolation from people, and now we're trying to get the two together. And that means that they're operating in a social context, which means that there will be social norms, moral norms that need to be followed. And so as we embed these machines into our everyday lives and we interact with them in our everyday lives, I think the expectation and the requirement for some moral competence is growing. And then the third driver is human likeness. I brought my friend, Robbie, here, who's a now robot, very cleverly designed humanoid robot. Looks like a human, moves like a human, will occasionally turn around to look. He's probably confused by the fact my voice is coming out of different places. But if it wasn't, he would turn around and look because he can sense there's a sound coming. He's looking for faces. So if his eyes turn pink when you're looking at him, he's detected your face. So you can see that's already going quite some way into social embedding. Now, as we do this, we're going to move from basically the bottom left-hand corner for you of this graph, where we don't really put morals into machines, and we're really only relatively recently started thinking about ethical design of machines, to the next level, which is operational morality. So in other words, the programmers code some moral, they make sure that the robot behaves well, they design it so that it behaves well, meets our expectations and so on. So that's operational morality. Functional morality is where you start to put some ability into the robot for it to realize that its actions can have moral consequences. So you put in the code in some way, the ability to perceive that and to allow that to affect the autonomous decisions that it's making as it's interacting with people. And then the top right-hand corner is full moral agency. So this is human level moral competence, right? I'm going to come clean at the beginning. I mean, I could leave you in suspense until the end, but I'm going to come clean at the beginning. I don't believe machines will ever get to the top corner of that. I don't believe we'll ever get full moral agency. And later on, I'll explain why. But certainly, functional morality is a possibility, and we'll look briefly at that later on. So I just have some illustrations for you of each of those drivers. So you are familiar with autonomous vehicles. I think I might need to. We have sound. So this is an autonomous vehicle. 2 people getting in the back. No driver, of course. And off they go. Smiling people. Very important that they're smiling people and not worried people, right? Stopping for someone crossing, that's good. Look how far away it stopped from the person crossing the road. Oh, that stopped sooner than I thought. And look at how many cars there are on the road. Okay. Now, I know these problems will be solved. I mean, autonomous vehicles, the technology behind it is rapidly developing. We will have these vehicles on our roads. I was at Milton Keynes at the weekend. Have you seen the robots in Milton Keynes, the autonomous robots? Yeah, we were taking pictures of them crossing the roads, the little boxes on wheels, delivering groceries up and down and waiting for the cars to go, waiting for the pedestrians. So these are coming, and they are coming. We still have a way to go before they're completely safe. So that's as the decision. So that's kind of an autonomous decision making on the how the vehicle handles the road situation. Here's one. I wonder if I press that. No.
Introducing Jibo, the world's first family robot. Say hi, Jibo.
Hi, Jibo.
Jibo helps everyone out throughout their day. He's the world's best cameraman. By intelligently tracking the action around him, he can independently take video and photos, so that you can put down your camera and be a part of the scene.
Jibo, take the picture.
He's a hands-free helper. You can talk to him, and he'll talk to you back, so you don't have to skip a beat.
Excuse me, Anne?
Yes, Jibo.
Melissa just sent a reminder that she's picking you up in half an hour to go grocery shopping.
Thanks, Jibo.
He's an entertainer and educator. Through interactive applications, Jibo can teach.
Let me in, or else I'll... And I'll... And I'll blow your house in.
Hey, where'd you go? There you are.
Right there is a reason why we might need these machines to have some moral awareness of what they're doing, right? In the child's bedroom with their name on it, you know, and that gives a lot of information. If that was internet connected, which it is, that is a risk, right? And so you can see even a simple thing like that, which looks really useful and engaging and great for children, great support for learning, but still has moral consequences and ethical issues that it arises. Now, just to play a short bit of this one. This is Cosmo. Cosmo is a robot with personality, unfortunately. So he's celebrating having won that little round of the game. Yeah, now it's having a temper tantrum. So you can see how that social embedding is actually putting robots and people together in situations where there are social norms and there are moral norms on how they should behave together, and that is driving the agenda. So moving on to the second dimension, human likeness. As robots become more human-like, then the expectation is that they will have human-like qualities, which includes their moral competence. And here we have some robots. The robots, by the way, are the ones sitting down, just in case. This is Professor Ishiguro lab in Japan, in Osaka, and these are Geminoid robots. They're robot twins, and they are remarkably human-like. Yeah, and you look at that, and if you imagine that animated and interacting, you start to then create expectations of what it can do. How about this one? This is a robot, believe it or not. And the amount of control, I mean, the sophistication of the control behind this robot is just unbelievable, really. But it doesn't have to be necessarily restricted to looks. Oh, here's another one, maybe this one. So this is another humanoid. Again, it's more to do with how it moves than how it looks. It does have arms and a head, and you can see it making gestures. And again, as it moves in that way, you know, it moves like a human being. It's behaving like a human being. So maybe it has human being qualities, but as yet it doesn't, right? So we can see the technology in terms of building robots and enabling them to do things that humans do physically, and to gesture and to sort of move in a way that makes you think that they're interacting with them, has come on a long way. But it's not just the physical appearance that we need to be concerned about. So here, if this plays, you're going to hear. You're going to hear a demonstration by Google of their app, which makes a hairdressing appointment for somebody. You may have already seen it. It's very popular on YouTube, but it's a great illustration. And I think the one on the left is the AI.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. Mm-hmm. Sure, what time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now. Okay, we have a 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's her first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
And that is an amazing achievement, actually, because language interaction is incredibly difficult. Very, very difficult. And we've been working on it for a very long time. But that level of sophistication, the speech recognizer in that must be very high quality, because it was not specifically trained on that person's voice. We don't know who's going to answer the phone. And it understood all the questions, you know, and so on. So you can see the level of human likeness in disembodied AI is also on the increase, right? Interestingly, that AI is in control of somebody's diary and what they do with their time, which may have ethical consequences. And, you know, so I think, so as we move along the line of human likeness in various different ways, we're going to see an increased expectation that these robots will have moral competence and an ethical awareness of the interactions that they have with people. So we've already heard a little bit about my story. Thank you very much at the beginning. This is a sort of a journey, my academic journey. Started out at Lancaster, as we heard, did a PhD in medical explanations from medical systems, did some work with machine learning and explanations, some work on chaos in the brain. And then I came to, that's the moment here is when I gave up my perfectly good job in 2008 and did a postdoc at Oxford. Actually, I was looking to do apologetics. That was my interest. And I wanted to do apologetics in a university, and I'd just given up my job. And I spoke to various people in apologetics, and they said, if you want to do it in a university, you need a job in a university. So then I looked to get back in, and I did a postdoc at Oxford on a project called Companions, where we developed a 3D animated avatar that you have a social conversation with about your day at work. And that really opened my eyes to the possibility of AI connecting to people. Up until that point, it was kind of a black box thing that I was working on and trying to improve algorithms, but I never really thought about it as a way of connecting to people. And also at that point, once I saw that, I saw the theological implications of that and what that means for us as human beings. What does it say about us as human beings and the questions it would raise? And I then began to look at that as an apologetic to use. And that sort of led to what I'm doing today. And so then after that, I went back to Oxford Brookes, and I was in a head of department capacity, so I created a new lab, a robotics lab, where we studied human-robot interaction and social robotics, and we're still doing that today. And then personal motivation, my personal journey. Well, I've been about a bit, as you can see. I was born into a lovely Catholic family, a very sincere, dedicated Catholic family. Later on became a Methodist, even later now Anglican. So I'm kind of going around trying all different flavors, I suppose. But the thing that I want to show you here is that right in the middle of all that, I hit a personal moral crisis, which resulted in the breakdown of my marriage and divorce and lots of hurt and heartache for many years. And I began to reflect on that. I mean, at this point in my life, I had been a Christian for 30 plus years. And I started to ask myself, how could that happen to somebody who has, taken their faith seriously, had a close relationship with God throughout that time? And that got me interested in the idea of moral development, in Christian moral development. And I came across the work of the late Dallas Willard, wonderful man, who explained so much of this for me. It made so much sense. It was really helpful to understand how this kind of thing can happen and what we need to do in order to sort of avoid that kind of moral crisis. And I'm going to outline a little bit of what he said to you later. But essentially what happened is about 3 years ago, I decided to merge these two journeys together. We were already working in social robotics. It was already becoming clear that there were ethical and moral issues there. And I decided that my private interest in Christian moral development and my academic interest in social robotics fitted together very well. And I started with colleagues at Brookes to look at the issue of developing autonomous moral machines. And it's interesting that the team that I work with, we're not all of the same faith background. And so every week we have interesting discussions about what it means to be moral, what it means to be human, and how we can try to simulate that on machines. So if you're going to put morals, if you're going to put ethics in a machine, you need to decide which ethics you're going to go for, right? And there's an awful lot of choice out there. People have been arguing about this for many centuries. It goes back a long way, and there still isn't real agreement. If you talk to ethicists, they all have different views. There's no real agreement on what system of ethics should work. So just to pick out three, and all three of these are being used in the robotics area to develop moral competence in machines. We have consequentialism, so the end justifies the means. So this is the robot trying to work out, if I did this action, what would be the outcome of that, and then trying to evaluate the outcome of that and decide whether or not to take it. Deontology, which is really about duty. It's not looking at consequences, but in this situation, what is my duty to perform? What should I be doing? Okay. And then finally, virtue ethics, which is about character, about moral character and how we develop over time. And I love this quote here from Aristotle. We become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts. by repeating behaviors so they become habit and therefore form the basis of our morality. And without going into the detail of it, I've come to the view that virtue ethics is the foundation. And it's the foundation because it's the basis on which we think, and the basis on which we think is the basis on which we act. So, people are seriously investing a lot of time into developing machines that have moral competence. And there are two broad approaches. There's the top-down approach, which basically takes rules, ethical rules, moral rules, codes, and tries to code them in a way that apply to a robot, and then the robot applies them in various situations. So like taking the 10 Commandments, for example, you could try and convert that into rules. And so the issue with these is that the rules that you develop are almost always very specific. They apply to given situations. And if the robot finds itself in a situation that's slightly different from the rules it has, it doesn't know what to do. Okay? And we call that brittleness. There's a brittleness to the rule system. The bottom-up approach doesn't use rules. It just creates an experience for the robot, for the AI, and enables it to learn what is right and wrong. So it might think about a parent with a child, right? You say, don't do that. That's not right. That's not good for you. Don't do that. You're giving moral feedback to them, and then they hopefully will learn and adopt that, and that becomes part of who they are in their decision making and thinking. So the approach that we're taking is predominantly bottom-up. So we are designing experiments where we put robots in situations where they can act, and the actions, some of them may turn out to be good, some of them may not turn out to be good, and the idea is we give them feedback and they learn from experience what is acceptable and appropriate behavior and what isn't. So let's just look briefly at how moral development happens in humans, and this is very much a Dallas Willard point of view. I know there are different points of view, but I'm going to focus on him today. How do we change? Well, the first point that he makes is we don't try and target the action. Right? If there's something that you're doing which isn't right, just trying not to do it is generally not a good policy. It doesn't work. So if anger is your problem, then trying not to be angry in the moment is not going to work. Think of an angry person. That was the first image that came up when I did a search on the internet for angry people. Okay, if he tries to not be angry when he's standing there on the podium and answering a reporter's question, that policy will not work. You have to deal with the anger outside of that context. You have to deal with it before you get to that point. You have to target the sources of the action, and the sources of the action is what's going on inside you, right? And that's what you need to address. And how do we do that? Well, the Christian perspective is you do it by becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ. And the word disciple is the Greek word that we translate to disciple is mathetes, which means student, or apprentice is better in the description. You become an apprentice of Jesus Christ. You learn from him. You observe the pattern of his life when he lived on earth in his earthly ministry, and then you apply that to yourself and you learn together with him. So here is my definition of what a discipleship is. 3 parts: lifelong apprenticeship to Jesus Christ. These things don't happen overnight, right? If you decide not to become an angry person, you just can't do it, in the next 10 minutes. it's going to take a while, and depending on how deeply embedded that behavior is in you, it's going to take a while. So it's lifelong apprenticeship. Lived from within the kingdom of God, that's really important. Dallas Willard talks a lot about what God is doing and how he is acting in the world with you, through you, and around you. That results in spiritual transformation into Christ-likeness. That's the target. That's the gold standard. Jesus is the gold standard that we're aiming for when we're talking about moral development. And Dallas has this golden triangle that he uses. The corners of the triangle are the different contributors to our development. So the Holy Spirit, everything is governed by the Holy Spirit, okay? But the ordinary trials and temptations of life is the training ground, right? This is how we learn. We don't necessarily go into a monastery and learn in isolation from the rest of the world. We learn on the job as we're doing it, right? And together with that, planned disciplines. And we again look to Jesus and his pattern of life. What did he do? We know he fasted. He had silence and solitude. He had regular practices, memorizing scripture. We know that he did. And that's how he curated his heart. And that's what it's about, curating your heart. And Dallas has this wonderful diagram. I love this diagram. I find it so helpful, of the essential dimensions of the self when you're thinking about moral development. These are the things that you are engaged in that development. And it's inspired by the saying that Jesus uses in the Bible, which I think is a quote from Deuteronomy, when he was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Five areas. And that's what he's got here. So we've got the heart, the will and the spirit in the center. That's the executive center of the self. That's what kind of makes the decisions on how you're going to behave. Around that, you've got thought and feelings. So these are concentric circles because there's a sense in which the inner ones are contained in the outer ones. Then we've got the body, okay, that we act through. We've got our social context, how we relate to other people, and then encompassing all of that is the soul. Okay, and those are the essential dimensions for moral development. Right, so very, very quick whistle-stop tour, and I just want to try and apply that now to robotics. How would we translate that? Does it translate to the robotics situation? What is the equivalent of discipleship for a robot? A lifelong apprenticeship to who? Who is setting the standard here, right? Well, if it's my robot, it would be me, I guess. Unfortunately, not a great standard to set, but there we go. But it needs to learn from someone's example and teaching. They're not just going to discover it, right? I think there've been some discussions in my group where, ethics, morality is just out there. You just need to set the robot free, it will discover it. No, it won't. It won't. It needs guidance and it needs a standard to look towards. Okay, so live from within. Whose kingdom or queendom? Right, so who is acting in and around and through this robot to make things happen for the robot, right? Who has ultimate responsibility for what the robot does? Okay, I'm not answering necessarily all these questions, I'm just raising them. That results in transformation into whose likeness, right? Golden triangle, well, instead of the Holy Spirit, we have the action of the human, the owner, the developer. We do have ordinary interactions with humans, with the world. Okay, so we can set it up so that very similar situations are faced by the robot. And we can do some planned activities, but probably not fasting and the same things that we do, but some targeted activities for learning. Again, in order to develop the mind of who is the question. Interestingly, and I only really cottoned onto this when I started to prepare this talk. When we talk about autonomy, we're talking about increasing autonomy being one of the pressures. What we're doing is we're focusing on that executive center of the self, the will and the mind. When we're talking about increasing human likeness, we're talking about that plus the body. Yeah. And when we're talking about increasing social interaction, we put the social dimension in there. And that in order to achieve moral competence, we need something equivalent to a soul. Right? The soul is the seat of the personality. Okay? It picks up on the moral quality of the decisions that we make as we live our lives. That's who we become over time, right? This is the virtue ethic perspective. So these drivers are actually focusing us in on these aspects of moral development in a human being and looking at the equivalent of what that might look like in robots. So, just a few minutes to go. Coming to the question of, can robots be moral agents? Well, it depends on your view of reality, right? And there are lots of different world views. But in my worldview, there's a problem because we know that robots are causally, we know that the universe is causally determined. Okay, there are laws of physics, cause and effect, all right? And if a robot is completely determined by everything in it, its machinery, its software, then can we say it has free choice to act? In my view, no, right? Doesn't have that freedom to choose. It's determined, it's programmed, it's designed. If it hasn't got a freedom to choose to act, then in my view, it cannot have moral agency. So it cannot have that full level of moral competence that a human being has. So I raised this in my group, right? And we talked about it. And one of the outcomes that we all agreed was that we could simulate choice to act. So we could write a program, wouldn't be too difficult, to simulate the ability of a robot to choose. I mean, that's what autonomy in robots is, right? It's a program that simulates a choice process, all right? But it's not free. I mean, it's never free. It's always constrained. And if you can simulate a choice to act, then you can possibly simulate moral agency. Okay? Now, the problem that I have with that is that one of my colleagues who I respect deeply in my group came to me and said, well, look, if we simulate this, and we simulate it so well that there is no objective test that will enable you to tell the difference between the simulation and the real, in other words, the human and the robot. No, that was the wrong way. The robot and the human. Then there is no difference. They are the same. And that really troubled me. That really troubled me, because it's quite a convincing argument. And the reason why it sounds convincing is because there's an underlying hidden assumption which is to do with the objective test. And the objective test is always something we can do. It's a material thing. It's an act we can do in the physical, right? It has no way of connecting with anything that is non-physical, non-material, right? So I started to think about how you could address that as a Christian. I mean, I don't want to develop software that in the end people will say, well, it's as good as a human, so there's no difference. This machine is a human being, just like anything else. We'll treat it like a human being. And I don't believe that. I believe there's something different about human beings. And so I came across, I decided to tackle the issue of simulated, right? What does simulated mean? And if it's simulated to the level where you can't tell the difference, does that mean that it's authentic, right? So I introduced the concept of authenticity, authentically human. And so I said to this guy, I had a piece of paper, and I didn't prepare beforehand, I would have done it now. I got a piece of paper and I wrote £50 on it, and I said, look, here's a simulated £50 note. Please give me 2 20s and a 10, which of course he wouldn't do. It's not a very good simulation. Everybody could see it's a fake, right? But I could have gone through a lot of trouble and made that absolutely convincing. I could have made it look like this, right? I could have made it totally convincing. This is a £50 note that I made. Now, would he swap it? If he knew it was a fake, no, still. Doesn't matter how good it looks, right? It might be really convincing, but if he knows it's a fake, it's not authentic, nobody's going to use it. Even if I take exactly the same process, imagine that I had enough money, and why I would do this, I don't know. But if a thought experiment, I reproduce everything, all the materials that they use in the Royal Mint, all, the printing and the processes that they produce this with, and it is identical, right? Materially, you cannot tell the difference, but it's still a fake. It's not authentic. And as soon as somebody knows that, they're going to treat it differently, right? Why is it not authentic? Why is it not authentic? What's the difference between an authentic £50 note and a fake one? Well, there is an authority behind the authentic one, the real one. Yeah, there's a picture on here, the Queen, right, who's commissioned the Royal Mint to make the money, and there's the Bank of England, there's all that behind it. So this has value, right? This has value by virtue of the fact that there is an authority behind it. Okay. Are you beginning to see the parallels with the human versus the robot? There is an authenticity of a human because there is an authority behind it. There's a godly authority behind the human being. And no objective test can test that. It can't happen, but it doesn't mean to say it's not real and it's not true. And so that's how I wrestled with that one. I'd be interested in your thoughts and questions about that, if you can think of a better way of challenging it. So just want to finish off very quickly by saying that we have done some work on this. On the autonomy side, we've started to think about what it's like for robots to create novel goals. In robotics, goals are the end state of a world that the robot wants to achieve, right? And most of the time, the end state is determined by the designer, the developer of the robot. It chooses, these are the things that you can do, right? And this is what you can achieve. But it may become possible, and we're envisaging a way in which they can imagine, in quotes, an end state of the world and try and achieve that. That's a novel goal that drives behavior. And immediately that raises ethical questions. How do we know that that novel goal is ethical? Yeah? And so we started to address that. I'm not going to go into the detail now because I don't have time. There is a publication. And increasing social interaction. What we realized relatively recently is that the key to doing this, and what researchers are not doing at the moment, is to look at human moral development from a child perspective and to understand how children develop morally. We believe that's the key. And the heart of that is social interaction. We know from psychologists, we have a psychologist on our group who says that children are born with an innate basic sense of right and wrong. We know that. Right? That's commonly held view in psychology. And they're born with an innate pro-social drive. They want to connect, right? They want to connect with people. If you want to tell your child that they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, just break off the connection. Right? Go to your room. I'm not going to look at you. You're not going to get the smiley face. The baby doesn't get the smiley face. And so they begin to, and at that early stage, they begin to see those signals and those feedbacks. And that's the area that we're working on now in this project. So I'm going to finish there. I just want to say that I constantly ask myself whether I should be doing this, because it has implications for how we think of ourselves as human beings. But I do think it's important that Christians get involved in this work, because it's going to keep going, it's going to keep developing, and there are all sorts of influences on it. It's very difficult, it's a very challenging area to work in, both technically, but also philosophically and theologically challenging. I think we can learn a lot about ourselves. I've already learned a lot about myself going through this process. For me, AI is like another microscope on the human self. We learn about ourselves as we try and understand how to create machines that are equipped with the same abilities. Morals can't be bolted on. There are some people trying to do that. You take a robot, and here we're going to have a moral layer we put on the top. I'm not convinced that's ever going to work. And we need to be clear about accountability. Whose fault is it when the robot messes it up morally? Whose fault is it? And I've got to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. And then we've got about 10 minutes or so for questions. I think you've raised a lot of issues for us. Who would like to kick off? Right down at the front here. And can you wait for Steph to bring the microphone, then we can all hear?
Thank you. What about other religions? People working in your field of work who belong to other religions, do you foresee their approaches, priorities, problems being the same?
There are other people from other religions that are working in this area. I haven't seen a great deal. I've seen one Buddhist contribution. I've not seen a pattern yet. There's not enough of it around at the moment. I'm sure it will come, to see whether they're wrestling with the same basic issues. I suspect that Buddhism probably doesn't have an issue with the same issues that I've raised here today. A lot of this is being done in Japan. And in Japan, the cultural context in which robots are being developed is entirely different. I mean, they are treated in a way that is almost human-like in many respects. They're accepted. It's seen to be, it's something to aim for, to have a robot in your house. There are robot hotels. I don't know if you're aware. Robots that are run by hotels, plus armies of technicians behind them, keeping them going. But so the whole culture is different there. Here, it's much more challenging. There are a lot more questions because of the Christian context. So I think there are different perspectives and there are different challenges.
I'm a Christian myself, but for an atheist, what is the difference between an autonomous robot and a human being?
That's a really good question, thank you. And I know of atheists who are working in this area and quite prominently working in the area. And they believe that it can be done. They believe that we can build machines that model humans in terms of the morality, but they still want to hold on to the fact that there's a difference. And I haven't got to the bottom of what's driving that. They still think of humans as being special and different to robots, even though they believe they can replicate everything, because humans are just biological machines in that perspective. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. How should we treat the moral robot? If we were to treat a robot like we treat some animals, would that be a moral outrage?
Well, it's funny you should say that. It's already happened. I have a YouTube clip of a Boston Dynamics robot. Boston Dynamics are just phenomenal in the technology that they're developing in terms of robots that can move around without tethers, can climb hills, climb stairs, can be, you might have seen them knocked and so on. And they have this one video of a guy with one of their robots, it's an Atlas robot, that's trying to pick up a box. And it goes forward and tries to pick the box up. And the guy has a hockey stick and he slides the box out of the way, so the robot just gets up and goes forward again, tries to pick it up. And this time he uses the hockey stick to push it backwards away. And it staggers back. And then in the end, he pushes it in the back and it falls on its face. Now that video was developed to show the flexibility and the power of the robot just to cope with all these things happening. But the outcry around it, because this was cruelty, I mean, it looked like a human. It wasn't very human-like, but it had arms and legs, and it was being mistreated. And if you treat a machine like that, would you treat a human or an animal like that? So that's already happened, I'm afraid, yeah.
Question right at the back.
Thank you. To your question, should you be doing it? Absolutely. Thank you so much for. And as we are at the moment with an autonomous car, presumably somebody's had to program the car. If a child runs out in front of it, is the child going to be injured, or is it going to drive into the wall? That's the other option, and potentially injure the people in the car. I guess this has already been being worked on if we have autonomous cars, but I'd be interested to know if that's the case.
Yes, it is. There are a lot of people in this area that are working on that. That's called the trolley problem. It's a well-known philosophy problem. But I have issues with its application to autonomous vehicles. And the issue is that, well, the original trolley problem is where you have a runaway cart out of control going down a track. It's on a train track. And it's going to run over 5 people who are working on the track. But there's somebody standing at the side of the track, and there's a lever, and they could pull that lever and it will divert the runaway trolley away from the 5 people, but the one person in the trolley will be killed. And the choice is, do you pull the lever or not? Right? And that has been studied, and there's no answer to it actually, which is one of the issues that I have with it. Anyway, there's no real answer to it. When you try and migrate that to autonomous vehicle context, the issue is that the car is not on a track, right? It's making decisions about how it's steering, the steering angle, the speed, it's going acceleration, deceleration. If it was to try and work out, anticipate every possible combination of steering angle and brake stroke acceleration, in combination with the road surface, the degree of friction on the road surface, the weather conditions, the speed and the momentum of the vehicle, and what other road users might do, like dive out of the way, or a child might be able to move faster than an old person, or all that kind of stuff. And then, once it's done all that, work out the moral consequences, the ethical, which one is the best ethically. By the time it's done that, it will just kill the 5 people. I mean, the computing power that you would need for that, I think we're pushing the limits. If it just brakes to avoid a collision, that to me is good enough. And if a human being just brakes to avoid a collision, that to me minimizes blame, which is what this is about. The reason why I struggle with it is that so much effort is being focused on that, and not enough is being focused on other aspects of autonomous vehicle in terms of road use. So the road is a social space, right? If you're a driver or a road user, you will know that you are in relation to other drivers when you're on the road, and sometimes in a very close relation, if you have a collision. And so there are social norms, there are ethical ways of driving well. We all know bad drivers. I'm sure nobody in this room is a bad driver. We know people who tailgate, who overtake when they shouldn't do, and do all sorts of things. And that, to me, is a more serious problem, that these autonomous vehicles need to be able to recognize the driving behaviors of other road users. and be able to respond to those. So thank you for that question. Yeah.
Well, lots of hands. Can I go to Joe at the back there, and then I'll come across over on the gentleman with the green top.
I want to ask a bit of a thorny question. I recognize that this might feel uncomfortable, but I'm sure you're familiar with Blade Runner. You have these replicants.
Yes.
They're indistinguishable from humans. You have to find a test to figure out which is which.
Yeah.
My dilemma with your criteria for a full moral agent is I don't know how we find the replicants among us if we're trying to search for the moral authority of God. I mean, do you see, I think this becomes quite a struggle for the actual applied applications, because if we imagine the replicant out in the world, we imagine this creature doing moral things. In terms of actual impact, they are a moral agent for the purposes of whether you die or not, essentially. How do you actually apply this standard to the challenges we'll face? I mean, I understand it's philosophically satisfying, but I don't know what it gets us in terms of solving our eventual problems.
Yeah, and I think what will happen, and what we're already, I think, seeing happen, is that people will just treat it like a human being. If it looks that human, if it's acting that human, they will treat it like a human being, and that raises other issues. But as long as we respect and use the same moral code. And then it becomes which moral code you're talking about, right? Then I think personally I think there's no harm if we treat robots with respect and people with respect. The issue I have is not that. The issue is saying that they are the same, not whether you can test that they're the same. My issue with the simulation is the philosophical position and the theological position that machines and humans, if machines are identical to humans physically, then there is no difference. Okay, so it's a theological and a philosophical point of view. I don't think there is a test. If we do reach that level of reality, and there are some indicators that we might, I don't think there is a test, and we'll enter a situation where we don't know. We don't know whether we're dealing with, I mean, the person on the end of that phone, the hairdressers, did not know she was dealing with an AI. Right? To me, that's an ethical problem. The AI should have declared itself at the beginning.
Time.
Why? Sorry, why? Because I think that at this stage in development, the human being will make assumptions about the caller, about who they are. I mean, you could see it as a functional interaction, yeah, which is fine, it's okay. But to me, there's a difference in talking to a machine as talking to a human being, and the difference is to do with how they're valued, I suppose, at the bottom line. I'm thinking on my feet here. It's a good question. It's a really good question. So I wouldn't value an answer machine in the same way that I would value a person answering the phone. I think there is a difference, and the deception, because that is a deception. That's the area that is the problem for me. That is set up to make the person believe they're dealing with a human and not a machine, and there's a deception involved, which you may or may not think is an ethical issue, but I do.
I said I'd take one last question. Time is moving on, and we'll take that. Just one last one there.
Thank you. Your talk raised possibly more questions than it answered. So my question probably can't be answered in the time we have. But I think the key that struck out to me was at the bottom of one of your slides, which was who sets the standard. You said a robot will learn by being told, by being given feedback. Who decides what feedback it should be given? Who decides what that feedback should be? Who decides what is right and wrong?
Yes. No, that's right. And I think, I don't know, I mean, for me the answer, you always have to have a named person responsible, in my view. So I think we will arrive at a position, if robots are developing moral competence, that there will be someone licensed to develop this robot, right? And they will be the ones responsible for its behavior, and they will be whatever the behavior they give it, whatever standard they set. So I think that's the way I would like it to go, but that depends on an awful lot of things, because there are commercial pressures and there are all sorts of different sort of drivers that are pushing this technology forward, and it's going faster than we're actually thinking about it, to be honest. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. I think we'll draw things to a close there. You've raised lots of questions for us. You've kept us fascinated. I've been watching this little machine here, and he, she, or it has been listening attentively.
Yes.
And twitching round to everything you've been saying, and we have as well. And we want to thank you for giving us an excellent talk. Thank you.
Thank you.